Did Philemon make its way all the way down?
That way.
Okay. If you didn't get a Philemon or somebody else comes in, I'm going to put them right down here on the end of the table.
Got our scholar.
All right. We actually are going to achieve three things tonight. I am confident of that. This is the last class because we'll have a devotional next Wednesday, and then we'll start a new quarter. And I will be teaching in the auditorium. Continuing, I did not get through 3 transforming trips in a quarter, so I'll be doing that in the auditorium. I'm not sure what's happening here. I had one thing to finish with regard to the tips for word studies. We dealt with just about everything. We mentioned completely research the word that you're looking up. Don't assume that the word means the same thing in every place. We use the examples of faith and kingdom. Consider a word in its context. We talked about dogs, and we talked about Jesus and his use of the word woman, and how you need to understand how that would have worked in context. And context helps us to get to that. Avoid doctrinal prejudice. We talked about having presuppositions, baggage when we come to the text. We talked about adultery and using a secondary definition and rather than the way it's used mostly in the New Testament. We talked about baptism and how King James was a Greek scholar. Truly he was. But he also didn't believe that baptism by immersion was essential. And so his translators were chickens. And they came to him and they asked him what he thought should happen. And he said transliterate it. So y'all know what that transliteration simply means: taking a word from another language and in our case would be anglicizing it, but bringing it into the receiver language. As they spoke English, baptizo became baptism. And they said, we'll kick that can down the road for other scholars. And they, by that point, this is the time when the Reformation movement had just started to take off in the century before. By the time the modern version movement was, you had the RSV in the 19th century, but the vast majority of them, the American Standard and so forth, that's the 20th century. You think about the religious landscape by the 1900s. There's too much diversity on baptism for any translator who wants to sell Bibles to translate baptizo as immerse, which is what the word means. It's so confusing that there are a great many people who absolutely refuse to acknowledge that that's what that word means in English translation. And that's all because the word was not, there was baggage brought to the text. So we want to make sure we don't do that. All right, and I think that's about, we did talk a little bit about considering the usage of the word during Bible times, and I gave a couple of examples. I could give maybe one more that helps us with this. Do you remember what they were, anybody? They're Greek words, so you may not have even attempted a spelling on them. One was solo. You remember us talking about that? And the idea is that words change meaning over time. English is a living language. And so we could think about words that have changed their meaning in English, but the Greek language was the same way. So when the word solo was originally coined, when it came into the lexicon of the Greek speakers, it meant to spit. So literally, to solo was to expectorate. Okay? Then, as it evolved over time, it meant to pluck the beard. So I'm soloing, right? At a period before the writing of the New Testament, it meant to sing and to play. Now, here's the thing about Greek. It's a very precise language. Hebrew is a very abstract language. You'll have a Hebrew word, it can have 4 or 5 different meanings, but the Greek has very specific words for the terms that are being utilized. By the time we get to New Testament Greek and its usage, that word solo simply meant to sing. It did not mean to sing and play. Okay? We've got to understand what a word meant. So The last example we gave was a presbyteros, which is one of our words, presbyter. It's one of our words for elder. Okay, and it is a Greek word translated elder. And that word meant a manager, a steward, and so forth. It meant somebody who was an owner. They came to mean somebody who led in some way. By New Testament times, it meant to one who was appointed a leader over the local church. But after the New Testament was written, what did that word come to mean? What was a presbyter? The meaning changed a little bit. It's adopted. It's used by some in religion.
Bishop.
It's a bishop. And a bishop would refer to somebody who had what kind of jurisdiction? So I can't talk, I don't have a pen.
Multiple churches.
I'm in panic mode. All right, so we have presbyters. Just toss me one. Let's see if I can catch.
Black and red.
Black. Black and red's great together, but anyway.
Right.
All right.
Go dogs.
So there you go. All right. So you have presbyters who served as elders over one congregation. That's what the word meant in New Testament times. But in the patristic periods, or the times of the early church fathers, the idea was of multiple churches and one, a bishop. Sorry, you guys can't see it down there very well. That's how the word came to be meant, or translated. But that's not what it meant in the New Testament. So we can't look at what a word means before the New Testament to try to define the word in the New Testament, or how a word is used after the New Testament to understand how it's used in the New Testament. So that's why it's so important for us as we're doing our word studies to understand how it was used during biblical times. And I had a couple of other examples of that. One other one is one that, and I've been guilty of this before. Romans 1:16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's what?
Power.
It's the power of God. Anybody know what the Greek word is there? It's dunamis. You ever heard somebody come along and say, the gospel is, what does dunamis sound like? Huh? No, dunamis. Say it.
Dynamite.
Yeah, the dynamite. You ever heard somebody go, man, the gospel is the dynamite of God. That's what Paul is actually saying, almost with a knowing look, like here's my deep Greek insight. What's the problem with that? Alfred Nobel's not going to come along for another 1,800 years. Paul had no thought of dynamite when he's speaking of the gospel there. In fact, that power, what does dynamite do? Why do you use dynamite? It'll blow stuff up. Is that what Paul is talking about in Romans chapter 1? Is he trying to, what would be blown up? What is the power of God unto what? Salvation. Now, yes, there are things that need to come out of our life, but that's not what Paul's using that word to say. He is saying that faith is that which has the power to transform our lives. That's what the book of Romans is all about, right? So let's make sure we use it as it is in its century. The last thing is test your assumptions on the technical meaning of a word. And one example of this might be with regard to premillennialism. In Matthew chapter 24, you guys are very familiar, right, that Jesus and his disciples are walking outside of the temple in Matthew 24, and the disciples point to Jesus to Herod's temple. Now, been to Jerusalem, and I've seen the Western Wall. That's the only remnants of that remain. But what you can see today is only a portion of how massive this was. And you think about how big the stones are. They had to go over 100 feet up to the top. Without the technology we have today, I don't know that we have satisfactory answers as to how they did that. But you can imagine this incredible structure. It had renown in the world because they had come back from Babylonian captivity and they had rebuilt the temple. But in what they call the Hasmonean period, right before Christ was born, Herod the Great was this master builder. And he has all these projects that he does in Palestine, but one of them is the temple. And it's this grandiose edifice, this building. And so the disciples come out and they say that they're getting Jesus to look at how grand the temple is. And Jesus, remember, he says, I'm telling you there's going to come a time soon when there's not one stone standing on top of another one. And so they said, when shall these things be? And when shall be the sign of your coming? How many questions is that? There's 2 questions. So logically, Jesus answers the questions in order. All right? You can tell that he's leaving the first question for the second question when you get to about verse 35, and he says, I just lost it there. It's not my notes. It's
Heaven and earth won't pass away. 36 says, but in that day of an hour.
But of that day and that hour knows no man. All right, so do you notice a shift here? He's shifting from what's going to happen in Jerusalem when this temple is going to be destroyed to what are the signs of your coming. Of that day and that hour, and from that point to the end of Matthew chapter 25, you talk about studying the Bible for all it's worth. He has a series of 5 judgment parables, one after the other, to demonstrate the nature of the judgment to come. It's in contrast with the destruction of Jerusalem, which would have signs, which you could tell. He's going to say in Matthew 24, when you see this happening, do this. Pray that it doesn't happen. When you're pregnant, what does that matter if it's the second coming of Christ? All of that's going to change forever. He's saying, in answer to the first question, look for these things, but then we're going to talk about something that we will not know until it happens. Premillennialists say that all of this is referring to the end of time. Okay, so that's where they incorporate ideas like the rapture. One's taken and one's left. Well, Jesus is answering the first question. Some are going to believe and leave the city of Jerusalem in accordance with the warnings that New Testament writers are giving, and some are going to ignore it, and they're going to be stuck in the city when history tells us that they're starved out, they're besieged by the Romans and Titus, and they starve to death. Some of them go up into the temple complex, and they hold out, and they're bombed out, but they're fired out, and they die together. It's a horrible time that's going to come and will signal the end of Judaism. You don't have genealogical records. You don't know who the priests are that can serve. No temple in which to offer sacrifices. Okay? Back to what I was saying. The word generation is an important word to the premillennialists. They want that generation to refer to race and not to time. Okay? Generation, in a very obscure sense, can mean that. So in Matthew 24:34, Jesus says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. They say, oh, that means race. Well, what can we do? We can go to the book of Matthew where the word generation is used 11 times, and we can ask, all right, let's apply this to the other places. How about Matthew 1:17? So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. Is that racist? No way in the world. How many races is Matthew dealing with in Matthew 1? It's important to understand the book. And most premillennialists would, in fact, I think all of them would agree. 1, the Jewish race, through whom the Messiah is going to come. Or how about Matthew 23:36? Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. And obviously contextually they'd have no problem with that meaning this epoch of time of about 20 years, right? Okay, anyway. So we want to test our assumptions on what a word means. That's hopefully something that can help you as you grow in your study. Any questions about any of that before I leave that? All right, I want to get to Matthew 18:15 through 20. This is the one that'll have 2 boxes at the bottom. Anybody come in late and didn't get one of these? Either weren't here before or left yours at home? Anybody need one of these? Okay, so what I want to do, if we're not afraid of silence, I want you to take a few moments and I want you to make some observations, look for some keywords, some threads. Would y'all rather work in a group or by yourself? Now, I can be democratic about that. I can be quick about it. Is it by yourself or in a group? You afraid you hurt somebody's feelings if you say it alone? Or okay, well, we'll let you work on it alone, unless I hear some kind of. If you have a neighbor you want to talk to about it, I don't care. That'd be fine. But do what you can to try to make some observations. Maybe you can start by yourself if you want to. So we're looking for words that repeat. We're looking for ideas in the paragraph that seem to be important. As much as you can, don't make interpretations unless they're interpretations from the paragraph. Don't think in terms of what other Bible passages say, and I'm going to be quiet so that you can concentrate. Anybody not understand the assignment, though? Okay, good deal. We'll take about 5 minutes or so. About 2 more minutes. And obviously, if you had more time, you'd be making more observations. It's pretty rich. I mean, and the thing is, if you were to take this for an hour, and I'd recommend, whether it's this or another paragraph, to do that. The more you sit there and examine this, the more, I think there's maybe a point where that gets a little harder to make new observations, but I think you'll do that. For the sake of time, let me go ahead. We're right at 5 minutes. What are some key words that stand out to you, phrases?
Listen.
Say again? Listens. Excellent. Why do you say that?
Because it's brought up.
Okay, so look at verse 15, listens. Verse 16, listen. Verse 17, listen twice. That's, we don't know how it's going to function yet, but we realize This is an emphasis of Jesus in this paragraph. All right? So you'll notice here, you guys might never see this, I have the question, significance. The first thing we're going to do in the process is, all right, let's find these words, and at some point in this process, we're going to go, what's the significance of these words? There is a significance to that word. What else? You. All right. I don't know. I believe that's the word that's most frequent. And that you might say that's not a theologically significant word. It's a little three-letter word. But if you'll notice how it works in the paragraph, you is huge. Don't have time including that your. Just go through and circle all the times the word you and your is found.
Well, I mean, I'm two. The numbers are scattered.
Excellent. And let's maybe expand that. It's two, but it's actually he varies that phrase. It's two or what? Two or more. Two or three. One or two. But two is the common denominator in there. What's the difference between one and two or more? What do you have with two that you don't have with one? You have a witness. You have corroboration as it deals with this paragraph. All right. Any other keywords?
If you.
Okay. Good. All right. That's going to serve in another. I think they can serve in another way, but it is. Let's even broaden it. It is if you, but it's even more than that.
If you're.
Yeah. If you're. What goes along with that? It may not every.
Oh, listen.
If he.
All right. If you, if he, but the word if. What is the word if? Now we're not doing hermeneutics here. We're just making an observation. What's the word if indicate? Choice, condition, right? Because it's assumed most places, but if, then, right? That's how it functions. If this happens, then this happens. All right. Any other keywords or threads?
Go, take, here.
Okay. I want to put that over here in the observation column. Give me the whole list. Go, take. What else goes in that list? Actually, let's do it in order. Go, show, good.
Tell.
Take, tell.
Establish. My Bible uses establish.
All right, what verse?
Verse 16.
Yep. And that's an effect. For the moment, I'm going to put it in this list.
Agree.
There's one more, huh?
Agree.
Okay, that's going to be, let me save that one. That's a future. Let me get to that in just a minute. Tell, after tell, there's one more in this list.
Treat.
All right, treat or let him be. All right, now, let's make an observation. To whom is this given?
Brother.
To whom is this instructed? So let's put it back to where your keyword is. You. Who are you in this paragraph? If you're to look in the context of what's being said here, who are you?
I'm the one that got sinned against.
You're the offended.
Yes.
Now, the offended is to do what? Go, show, take, tell. Maybe let it be doesn't belong there. I don't know. I'm about ready to chop that. It doesn't really change the point. I think that's more of a consequence like confirm or establish. All right. That's the offended. Now, what obligation or obligations is placed upon the offender?
Listen.
Okay. What else?
Refuse. I mean.
Now that's not the offender. It's kind of a trick question. That's it. Just listen. Now, there's an implication there, right? There's an implication woven throughout that that word listen means more than to hear. It means what?
Respond.
To change, to respond, to do, to take care of the offense. All right? But isn't it interesting? You want to do a mathematical equation here. If you're offended versus if you're the offender, who's got the greater obligation?
Defend.
Thank you. Yeah, the offended. That's not what the world says. The world says, if you do wrong to me, let's just start piling up what you got to do in order to get it all right. And maybe I'll stop there, but maybe I'll have a whole new list of demands. Now, who is the you in comparison to the they? The you, stronger or weaker? I mean, look what the Lord's expecting of the offended. And look at what the Lord's expecting of the offender. All right. Any other observations? What other observations do you see?
One of the things that
Sins
really
and
stood
fault,
out to
verse
me was
15.
together. Together.
Okay. All right.
It's not just one person word against the other, and they have to work together, all of them.
Absolutely. Right. This is not an isolation. This is something that's to be resolved. You think in terms of the offender and the offended. They need to get together. But if the offended's not being reached, if they're not listening, then 2 or 3 of you get together and then try to get together with the offended. It's all about the process of unifying. All right, Derek, what do you have to add to that?
We're in verse 15, it's talking about sins and fault.
Okay.
Talking about the sins of the brother and his fault.
All right, and what do you make of that?
Well,
I know I'm cheating. I'm getting you to do
I'm kind of
interpretation.
I don't want to get ahead of us here, but
No, that's okay.
It has to do with what was mentioned before, with humility, and that it alludes to everybody's got sin and fault.
Good. All right. It wasn't a part of the assignment. I wonder if anybody's going to do that. You can't. This is important for us to understand this paragraph, but this paragraph didn't just fall out of the sky all by itself. It belongs in a context. And if you'll look at what happened, and I heard Bible pages flipping, and I was hoping that was what was going on. I was hoping somebody wasn't going to Revelation or Amos or something, and you weren't. You're looking at the context. What happens just before this in verse 12 through 14? What does the Father, what does the Good Shepherd do? What does the shepherd there do?
He goes finds the one lost.
He leaves the 99 for the offender to bring them back. The one who sins, the one who has the fault, and leaves the 99. All right, and then were you maybe alluding to what happens next, Derek? Okay, so
getting to forgiveness.
all right, so Peter is listening to what Jesus has to say about all this, and he gets it to some degree. So he begins to ask, all right, so how far do we take this thing? How far? How many times do I have to go, show, tell the one who has offended me, have him listen, and to get things right, and then to sin and do fault against me over and over again? 7 times? All right. And of course, that's not the purview of ours, but it doesn't happen in isolation. It gives rise to Peter and the frequency of forgiving offenders who repent. So we're talking about a concept that's being carried through the context here. That's good. Any other observations you want to make about that, Derek?
No.
Okay. All right. Russell?
In the progression of how it's done.
I have the word just that way. It is a progression. What's the progression? Oh, wait, don't tell me. Don't tell me. I know the progression.
You mean
You hurt my
gossip
feelings,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna go tell Greg about it. And then me and Greg are gonna go talk to Barrett about it, and then we're gonna bring Chris in, Tommy in, and we're just gonna really rake Jerry over the coals. Can you believe what Jerry did to me? It hurt my feelings so bad. I don't know that. I just really wonder about the spirituality of that guy. And then of course Tommy's gonna tell me to do what's right and go to Jerry. But what's happening? There is a process.
Or he's gonna say, wait a minute, I know Jerry better than that. We're gonna gang up on sides now.
Okay, there's that. But what he needs to do is say, Pollard, you need to get yourself straight here because you have gone. That's what we do, isn't it? When somebody tells us about a brother, we go, hey, no, don't do that. I'll offer an invitation song here in just a little while. Why does Jesus put this in Scripture? Because we struggle with it. We don't want to do this. Why don't we want to do this? It's harder.
Confrontation.
It's confrontation. I don't know about you guys. I don't like confrontation. I would love to avoid it. And in polite society, we don't like to do that. But what we do is more destructive. if we don't do what this is, we wind up causing problems that didn't exist before. Maybe it's why the way we think about Jerry, or in our hypothetical here, or what we do to the unity of the church, because it's about coming together. It's about unity, right? Yes, sir.
To me, it goes back to pride. And because if you take it all the way back to where, even in chapter 17, where Jesus is saying, you want to criticize others for their faults and wanting to destroy me and wanting to put me to death, and you're pointing fingers when you have lots of faults of your own. And then he talks about humility.
That's right.
And then he gets into how to treat a brother that's offended you.
He shows them a child. He says, you can't enter the kingdom unless you're like this. And all of this is about spiritual development. You think about how much better off the group, and there's a group because we're talking about the whole church. Interesting, he uses that terminology here. The church hasn't been established yet. Let's see. Yeah, in verse 17. He's preparing folks for life in his body. And so he says, look, we got to make sure we do this in a way that makes for the most healthy arrangement possible. And so knowing, he made everybody, so he knows what's in us. He knows how we can tend to be. He knows we don't like confrontation and all these other things. And he knows that pride can get in the way. And it can cause us, if our pride is wounded, to sidestep the process. But you can't. All right, any other observations that you found there?
Well, they were to establish the facts.
Oh, okay, good. And that was used, established, confirmed. Now it's time for us to talk about that. So that leads us to what kind of observation? How do you establish?
2 or more witnesses.
Okay. All right. Independent folks who can tell you, look, this is what happened. And this needs to be cleared up. That's good. Not, I heard somebody said that Pollard said this about Jerry. That's not established. Right. Okay. Any other observations?
So you're saying that the witnesses are not there to witness what you're doing. They have witnessed what was wrong.
No. You're what you're saying. That they're witnessing the process. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Because there are going to be some circumstances where that's not possible. I misspoke.
Okay.
No.
I'm not.
Yeah, no,
I
you're
didn't
right.
mean it that way. I'm saying.
No, but you're there to make sure that this is being resolved in the right way.
Okay.
But it certainly does not mean what we often do to carry tales that we don't have any kind of information about. We weren't involved in the process except that we were brought into it. Great, thanks. That's good.
Well, something that sticks out to me is Jesus knowing what we have in us is today you may be the offended, tomorrow you're the offender as well.
Good.
So he's trying to he's teaching you that, hey, maybe you need to be a little lighter on that guy because you're him tomorrow.
Okay, that's good, and that gets us into the realm of interpretation. But that's a valid interpretation. See, this is what's going to start happening as we dive in and we drill down on the text. We're going to begin. It's going to be there's where our application starts to come. Right? Any other observations?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, in the King James, it says sins against you.
Okay, and what verse?
The 15.
Okay.
15. New King James says the same thing, but in New American Standard, which is what I typically use, it just says brother's sins. Is that a difference that's worth? I mean, is that nothing, or does that?
So here's I've
heard people talk about sins against you as if it's it's your personal offense, and I've heard other people say no, it's not more in tune with what's happened to you. It's in tune with what's happening to that brother, because the brother has sinned, and you're trying to find a way to not to resolve how you're offended, but to resolve how he is sinning.
Right. Now, I don't have does anybody have a King James open?
The New King James says the same thing.
Okay,
No,
so
my footnote in my Bible says that against you was a late ad, like the King James.
Okay, so that's what I was gonna say, but I want, if somebody had their version open, I was gonna ask if it's in italics. Is anybody's in italics? If it's in italics in the King James, New King James, what they're telling you is the translators added this. It's not in the Greek text. But really, when you're dealing with the King James, the New King James, it's built on the received text, the Textus Receptus, which is later and fewer manuscripts. The New American Standard and most modern translations, the ESV and so forth, is built on what we call the majority text. After the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, you have more manuscripts, you have older manuscripts discovered, you have more manuscripts, and so they're reading from a wider, more diverse group of Greek manuscripts. I would tend to go, and especially if you're New King James, see, here's the thing with New King James. New King James, what, has a, if you're like a 1979, they did their work after the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery, but their task was to give a modern English King James. So they're basically built over that same received text. But what they'll do, especially in your better Bibles, your study Bibles, your more comprehensive study Bibles in New King James, is they'll insert those footnotes to tell you, and that's significant. What that's telling you is this isn't in the larger majority of the manuscript families. And so it's a little bit more question as the what should be included in the text. And the broader understanding of sins, I think, fits the context better than against you. However, does it apply to against you? Absolutely. So nothing is lost there. But I believe that the way we see it here is, if it's a sin that's not even against you personally, you still have the same obligation to go to them one-on-one and to deal with it privately. Yes, sir.
That's what I was gonna say. I think it boils down to how you feel about it, because mine has a reference to Leviticus 19:17 where it talks about don't hate your brother. You shall not hate your brother in your hearts. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of it.
That's right. That's right. It's about, and that's what Jesus, he points the concern to. Look, he's built it off of the 99 being left for the one. Jesus cared about the offender, the one that was, I mean, he cares for the one who has the problem, the fault. And so he goes after them. So Jesus says, you do the same. And here's a process for how that's done. Only other thing, you guys have done a great job in 5 minutes collectively of coming up with so many great observations. Contrast between earth and heaven, that might be worth something to do in the development of this. The binding is of whatever shall have been found. Does your version say that? In other words, you're not making law, you're binding what shall have already been bound, you're loosing what shall have already been loosed. You're following divine orders, heavenly orders, and your earthly dealings with one another. Now, I wanted to end class this way. I actually wanted to end class by giving you keywords from Philemon. I got a big mouth, sorry. When you have done this with a text that you want to teach or just know better, you do this kind of work in the text, just think about how rich the application can be and how confident you can feel in presenting this material. I mean, this may be something that you're dealing with somebody and you want to sit down and say, look, let's look at this. And to be able to just go, now you don't need any advanced degree, any kind of specialized training, but just time in the Word, drawing these observations, making these connections together. Yes, sir.
You just said that we may be using these, but
We should be.
we should be, because
We must be.
if you take the progression, the offended may know there's a problem, but the offender may not know they offended.
Absolutely.
And if you can keep it within two people, it's a whole lot easier to take care of than you've got dozens of people.
Oh,
Because the
that's
version
right.
changes with every mouth.
And if somebody comes to know that everybody knows about something that only one person should have known about, and imagine how many things could get solved one-on-one without anybody being brought into it.
And that's why God put it there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And And we talk about how relevant is Scripture to my daily life. I think the deeper we study, the more we see that. And we can say more about it. I want to say this. I want to at least point you to that Philemon. I'm going to give you the key words. What I have here are ways. I was going to let you do it on this paper, but let me give you the number of times each word appears, and you can go through and choose. For example, I circled the word Christ. It's found 8 times in Philemon. The word love is found 5 times. I double underlined that in my marking here. Lord is found 5 times. I put a box around it. The word prisoner, I didn't have any colored markers or anything, but the word prisoner is found 4 times. I just kind of did a little color through like this so that not to obscure the word, but I could still see it, but it was something different I could do to differentiate that as a keyword, right? Does that make sense? Okay? Because if you aren't using multicolored pens, then you're going to run out of options. I see you brought yours. I disappointed you more than anybody. I'm sorry. Brother, I put a triangle around. It's found 4 times. I put this little triangle around it. Heart is 3 times. I put a bracket around that. Also, the word Jesus is found 6 times. I underlined that. Now, here's the thing about Philemon. What is the book of Philemon about? In as brief a synopsis as possible.
Slave.
An escaped slave to be forgiven. Why was this escaped slave to be forgiven? What was he also now? He's a brother. Keyword. All right? So what you do is you ask yourself, how does the word heart fit into this? How does the word love fit into this? Prisoner, how does that fit into this? Lord, how does that fit in? So, see, these keywords are always significant to what that book is about. And by having that in your Bible, it will help you in your digging down and trying to know that book better. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. We're done. Thank you.
I started reading the Bible. English is my worship. I don't know anything outside of nothing but bourbon. I'm amazed at how much. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's there. All we got to do is dig it out.